Emma Rodriguez sat in the corner of Sarah Chung's living room, her small frame curled into a tight ball on the overstuffed armchair that had become her sanctuary. The late afternoon sun filtered through sheer curtains, casting dancing shadows across the hardwood floor, but Emma's wide brown eyes remained fixed on an invisible point somewhere beyond the walls. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days had passed since that night, the night when her world shattered into a million pieces that could never be put back together. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart breaking a little more each day as she witnessed this beautiful child trapped in her own mind. A retired elementary school teacher with 30 years of experience, Sarah had fostered 12 children over the past decade, but Emma was different. The silence wasn't defiant or temporary. It was profound, absolute, and terrifying in its completeness. Not a single word, not a giggle, not even a cry had escaped Emma's lips since the night child. Protective Services removed her from her biological parents' home on Maple Street. The foster home had been carefully chosen for Emma's specific needs. Sarah's Victorian house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Phoenix's Arcadia neighborhood, far from the chaos of Emma's former life. Pastel walls decorated with cheerful artwork, shelves lined with children's books, and toys scattered invitingly throughout every room, all designed to create a sense of safety and normalcy. Yet Emma moved through this warm environment like a ghost, touching nothing, engaging with no one, existing in a bubble of traumatic silence that seemed impenetrable. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the child psychologist assigned to Emma's case, had tried everything in her considerable arsenal of therapeutic techniques. Play therapy sessions with dollhouses and action figures yielded nothing. Emma would sit motionless while Dr. Martinez acted out scenarios designed to help children process trauma. Art therapy proved equally futile. Emma's papers remained blank, her crayons untouched. Even music therapy, which had breakthrough success with other selectively mute children, failed to penetrate Emma's psychological fortress. The little girl would listen politely to lullabies and children's songs, but her expression never changed, her voice never emerged. Severe trauma-induced selective mutism, Dr. Martinez had explained during her latest consultation with Sarah, her professional composure barely concealing her frustration. Emma witnessed something so profoundly disturbing that her mind has essentially shut down all verbal communication as a protective mechanism. The human psyche, especially in young children, sometimes creates these barriers to shield itself from unbearable memories. She paused, removing her glasses to clean them, a nervous habit Sarah had noticed during difficult conversations. "I've seen cases like this before, Sarah. Sometimes they resolve in weeks or months, but sometimes ... Her voice trailed off, the unspoken possibility hanging heavy in the air. The police reports painted a horrific picture of domestic violence that no child should ever witness. Emma's father, Michel Rodriguez, had a documented history of alcohol abuse and explosive anger. That February night, neighbors called 911 after hearing screaming and crashing sounds from the Rodriguez apartment. When officers arrived, they found Emma's mother, Carmen, with a broken nose, multiple bruises, and a concussion. Miguel was arrested on charges of aggravated domestic violence, but he'd been released on bail pending trial. Carmen, hospitalized for 3 days, had been too injured and traumatized to care for Emma immediately. What made Emma's case particularly heartbreaking was what the first responders had discovered. 3-year-old Emma had been found hiding under her toddler bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit that was now her constant companion. She had witnessed the entire violent episode through her partially open bedroom door. Officer Janet Rodriguez, no relation, later reported that Emma hadn't cried or spoken when they found her just stare at them with those same wide, empty eyes that haunted Sarah's dreams. Tomorrow's custody hearing loomed like a dark storm cloud over their small household. Sarah had received the official notification 3 weeks ago, and since then, her anxiety had been a constant companion. Miguel Rodriguez had completed court-mandated anger management classes and a 90-day substance abuse rehabilitation program. His expensive lawyer argued that he was a reformed man who deserved a chance to reunite with his daughter. The legal system, designed to preserve family units whenever possible, was required to consider his petition seriously. Without Emma's testimony, the case relied heavily on medical records, police reports, and witness statements, evidence that, while damning, might not be enough to permanently sever parental rights. Carmen Rodriguez, still recovering from her own trauma, had been deemed an unfit guardian due to her inability to protect Emma from future violence. She loved her daughter desperately, but acknowledged that she couldn't guarantee Emma's safety. If Miguel regained custody, and she resumed their relationship, as she had done multiple times in the past, Sarah had spent sleepless nights researching selective mutism, consulting with specialists across the country, and praying for any sign that Emma might find her voice before tomorrow's hearing. She'd even arranged for Emma's favorite foods, new toys, and visits from therapy animals, hoping something might crack through the child's psychological armor. Nothing worked. Emma remained locked in her silent world, unknowingly holding the key to her own fate in a mind too traumatized to speak. The stuffed rabbit, a pink bunny named Mr. Hoppers, that Emma had received for her second birthday, never left her side. Sarah had watched Emma whisper to the toy late at night, moving her lips without sound, as if practicing conversations she couldn't bring herself to voice aloud. These moments gave Sarah hope that somewhere inside Emma's traumatized mind her voice still existed, waiting for the right moment or trigger to emerge. As evening approached, Sarah prepared Emma's dinner with extra care, hoping that familiar routines might provide comfort before tomorrow's life-changing court appearance. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, an unexpected four-legged visitor would unlock Emma's voice and change both their lives forever. The silence that had defined Emma's existence was about to be shattered in the most miraculous way possible. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m., but Sarah Chun had already been awake for an hour, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing the day ahead in her mind. Today was the day that would determine Emma's future, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on her chest like a physical force. She slipped quietly from her bed, careful not to wake Emma, who had finally fallen asleep around midnight after another restless evening of silent tears. Judge Patricia Williamson arrived at the Maricopa County Family Court building at 7:15 a.m., 2 hours before her first scheduled hearing. At 62, she had presided over family court for 20 years, but Emma Rodriguez's case had kept her, tossing and turning all night. She unlocked her chambers and spread the thick manila folder across her mahogany desk, reviewing every document one more time. Police reports with graphic descriptions of domestic violence, hospital records detailing Carmen Rodriguez's injuries, psychological evaluations that painted a picture of a severely traumatized child locked in silence. Patricia had seen it all. During her 2 decades on the bench custody battles that turned vicious, parents who fought more about hurting each other than protecting their children, and far too many cases where the system failed the most vulnerable. But Emma's case was different. The 3-year-old held crucial information about her father's pattern of abuse, yet her trauma-induced mutism made it impossible for her to testify. Without the child's voice, the judge would have to make a life-altering decision based on incomplete evidence. Miguel Rodriguez sat in the parking lot of his lawyer's office at 8 a.m., practicing his testimony one final time. Clean-shaven and wearing his best navy suit purchased specifically for today's hearing, he looked nothing like the man who had terrorized his family 6 months ago. The anger management certificate in his briefcase bore witness to 12 weeks of mandatory classes where he'd learned to manage his triggers and communicate effectively. His substance abuse counselor had written a glowing letter of recommendation, praising Miguel's commitment to sobriety and personal growth. His attorney, Marcus Webb, was one of Phoenix's most expensive family law specialists, hired using money Miguel had borrowed from his brother. Webb specialized in reunification cases and had successfully returned children to reformed parents. In dozens of similar situations, his strategy was simple: paint Miguel as a man who had hit rock bottom and clawed his way back to redemption, while subtly questioning whether a 3-year-old's traumatic memories could be trusted as reliable evidence. Meanwhile, across town, prosecutor Jennifer Walsh reviewed her notes one final time. At 38, she had dedicated her career to protecting children from abusive parents, but Emma's case frustrated her beyond measure. She had a mountain of evidence suggesting Miguel Rodriguez was dangerous: police reports from multiple domestic violence calls, hospital records, witness statements from neighbors who had heard the violence through thin apartment walls. But family court operated differently than criminal court. The emphasis was on family preservation whenever possible, and Miguel's completion of court-mandated programs gave him significant legal standing. Sarah helped Emma into her best dress, a powder blue outfit with tiny white flowers that Carmen had bought for Emma's 3rd birthday. The little girl stood motionless as Sarah gently brushed her dark curls, her reflection in the mirror showing the same empty expression that had become her constant mask. Sarah had explained multiple times where they were going and why it was important, but Emma's silence made it impossible to know if she understood the gravity of the day. "We're going to see some people who want to help you, sweetheart," Sarah whispered as she tied Emma's shoes. "They're going to ask you some questions, and it would be wonderful if you could try to answer them. But if you can't, that's okay too. I'll be right there with you." Emma's only response was to clutch Mr. Hopper's, her pink rabbit tighter against her chest. Dr. Martinez had spent the morning reviewing literature about selective mutism in court settings, desperately hoping for some technique she hadn't tried. She would be called as an expert witness to explain Emma's condition and the likelihood of recovery. But even she couldn't predict when or if Emma might speak again. Some children recovered their voices within months, while others remained silent for years. The unpredictability of trauma made Emma's case a legal and psychological puzzle with no guaranteed solution. At 9:45 a.m., the key players began converging on courtroom 3B. The room itself was an imposing space with dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and tall windows that cast long shadows across the spectator benches. Unlike criminal court, family court tried to maintain a less adversarial atmosphere, but the tension was palpable as opposing sides prepared for battle. Emma's court-appointed guardian ad litem, Rebecca Martinez, had spent weeks trying to determine what would be in Emma's best interests. A social worker with 15 years of experience, she had seen too many children return to dangerous homes in the name of family reunification. She carried a thick folder of documentation supporting permanent placement with Sarah Chun, but she knew that without Emma's testimony, her arguments might not be enough. As 10 a.m. approached, Judge Williamson entered her courtroom with a heavy heart. She had reviewed every precedent, consulted with colleagues, and prayed for wisdom. But she knew that in less than 2 hours, she would have to make a decision that would shape a little girl's entire future. The courtroom fell silent as she took her seat behind the imposing bench, her black robes a stark reminder of the authority she wielded. Sarah took her seat in the front row, Emma beside her, while Miguel Rodriguez sat confidently at the defendant's table with his expensive attorney. The battle for Emma's future was about to begin, and everyone in that courtroom knew that the outcome would rest on evidence, legal precedent, and the testimony of everyone except the one person who mattered most the silent little girl whose voice held all the answers. The courtroom had settled into its familiar rhythm of legal proceedings, when the heavy oak doors at the back creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the solemn chamber. Judge Williamson was in the middle of reviewing custody evaluation reports, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, when the interruption caused her to glance up from her documents. What she saw made her pause mid-sentence. Officer Marcus Thompson stepped through the doorway with the practiced quiet of someone accustomed to entering courtrooms. But it wasn't his presence that commanded attention. It was his four-legged partner, Rex, a magnificent German shepherd, with a coat of rich black and tan, moved with the fluid grace of a trained professional. His ears stood alert and attentive, scanning the room with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to assess every person and potential threat within seconds of entry. The sight of Rex immediately transformed the sterile legal atmosphere. Here was a creature of instinct and loyalty, a being who operated on a level far removed from the complex legal arguments and emotional manipulation that typically filled these walls. His presence brought something primal and honest into a room, where truth was often buried beneath layers of legal strategy and carefully rehearsed testimony. Rex was no ordinary police dog. At 5 years old, he was a seasoned veteran of the Phoenix Police Department's K-9 unit, with specialized training in narcotics detection, crowd control, and surprisingly, trauma response. His handler, Officer Thompson, had worked with him for 3 years, and their bond was the kind forged through countless hours of training and real-world situations where they depended on each other completely. The reason for their presence in courtroom 3B was entirely coincidental, or perhaps, as some would later suggest, divinely orchestrated. They were scheduled to provide evidence in the next case, a drug possession trial involving a defendant who had been caught with narcotics that Rex had detected during a routine traffic stop. Due to courthouse security protocols and the unpredictable nature of the morning schedule, K-9 units were required to wait inside the courtroom, rather than in the hallway where their presence might cause disruption. As Rex padded silently down the center aisle beside Officer Thompson, something extraordinary began to happen. The moment his paws touched the worn carpet of the courtroom, an almost imperceptible shift occurred in the atmosphere. Lawyers who had been whispering urgent strategies to their clients fell quiet. Court personnel who had been shuffling papers paused in their tasks. Even the bailiff, typically focused on security protocols, found his attention drawn to the noble animal making his way toward an empty bench in the back row. But it was Emma's reaction that would later be described by witnesses as nothing short of miraculous. The 3-year-old, who had been sitting motionless in her chair like a porcelain doll, suddenly lifted her head. For 6 months, her gaze had been directed inward, focused on some invisible point that existed only in her traumatized mind. Now, for the first time since that terrible night in February, Emma's eyes focused on something external, something real and present. Sarah Chun felt the change immediately. Emma's small hand, which had been lying limply in her lap, suddenly tensed. The little girl's breathing changed from the shallow, barely perceptible rhythm that had become her norm to something deeper, more engaged. Sarah followed Emma's gaze and understood instantly what was happening. After months of failed attempts by therapists, doctors, and loving caregivers, it was a police dog that had finally captured Emma's attention. Rex, with the intuitive understanding that made him exceptional at his job, sensed the focus directed at him. He turned his magnificent head toward Emma, and for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of normal time, child and dog regarded each other across the courtroom. Rex's tail, which had been held in a neutral position, began to move in a slow, gentle wag, not the exuberant greeting he might give his handler, but something softer, more knowing. Officer Thompson, following his partner's gaze, noticed the small girl watching them with an intensity that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Having worked with traumatized victims before, he recognized something in Emma's expression that others might miss. This wasn't just casual interest, this was recognition, connection, perhaps even hope. Judge Williamson, whose attention had initially been drawn to the K-9 unit's entrance as a simple procedural matter, now found herself watching Emma with growing fascination. In 20 years on the family court bench, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the subtle cues and unspoken communications that often revealed more truth than hours of testimony. What she was witnessing now defied her experience and challenged her understanding of how traumatized children process their world. The other court personnel began to notice the unusual dynamic unfolding. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine as she watched Emma's transformation. The bailiff positioned himself where he could observe both the child and the dog, his law enforcement instincts telling him that something significant was happening, even if he couldn't yet understand what it meant. Emma's foster mother held her breath, afraid to move or speak, lest she break whatever spell was being cast. After months of watching Emma exist in a state of psychological suspension, seeing her daughter engage with anything even silently felt like witnessing a miracle. In progress, Rex settled beside Officer Thompson with a disciplined calm that marked him as an elite working dog, but his attention remained partially focused on Emma. Something in his canine wisdom recognized a kindred spirit in other being who had witnessed things that no innocent creature should ever see, someone who understood the weight of carrying difficult memories. The courtroom had become a stage for an unscripted drama, with a traumatized child and a police dog as the unlikely main characters. Nobody could have predicted that this moment of connection would be the key that would unlock Emma's voice and change the course of the custody hearing forever. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The courtroom clock showed 11:47 a.m. when Judge Williamson called for what she intended to be a brief 15-minute recess. She needed time to review the psychological evaluations one more time before making her ruling, and the weight of Emma's future pressed heavily on her shoulders. The morning's proceedings had followed the predictable pattern of family court lawyers presenting arguments, expert witnesses offering professional opinions, and social workers reading from their carefully documented reports. Yet through it all, the most important person in the room had remained silent. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Williamson announced, her gavel striking the wooden block with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. "We'll reconvene at 12:15 for closing arguments." The familiar sounds of a courtroom. Break began, lawyers gathering their papers, spectators stretching in their seats, and the low murmur of hushed conversations. Miguel Rodriguez leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently about strategy adjustments. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh reviewed her notes one final time, knowing she would have only minutes to convince the judge that returning Emma to her father would be catastrophic. But Sarah Chun wasn't listening to any of the legal maneuvering. Her entire focus remained on Emma, who continued to watch Rex with an intensity that was both mesmerizing and heartbreaking. In the 6 months since Emma had come to live with her, Sarah had never seen the child show such sustained interest in anything. The little girl's dark eyes followed Rex's every movement as Officer Thompson quietly reviewed his own case notes for the upcoming drug trial. What happened next would later be described by every witness present as the most extraordinary moment in Maricopa County family court history. Emma slowly released her death grip on Mr. Hoppers, her pink stuffed rabbit, the toy that had been her constant companion, her source of comfort and security through the darkest months of her young life, slipped gently onto the chair beside her. Sarah watched in amazement as Emma's small hands pressed against the wooden armrest of her chair, her tiny body beginning to rise. "Emma?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, afraid that speaking might break whatever spell was unfolding. But Emma didn't hear her foster mother's voice. Her entire being was focused on the beautiful German shepherd, sitting calmly at the back of the courtroom. Step by careful step, Emma began walking down the center aisle, her patent leather shoes making the softest clicking sounds against the worn wooden floor. The courtroom gradually fell silent as people noticed the small figure moving with surprising determination. Judge Williamson, who had been preparing to exit to her chambers, paused at her bench, her hand frozen on her case files. Miguel Rodriguez stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open as he watched his daughter move independently for the first time since that horrible night. Officer Thompson became aware of the approaching child and placed a gentle restraining hand on Rex's collar. Not out of concern for the dog's behavior, Rex was impeccably trained, but to ensure the animal remained calm during whatever interaction was about to unfold. Rex's tail began a slow, measured wag, and his intelligent amber eyes fixed on Emma with an expression that seemed almost human in its understanding. Emma stopped exactly 3 feet away from Rex, maintaining the perfect distance that somehow her 3-year-old instincts told her was appropriate. She was close enough to see every detail of his magnificent coat, to notice the alert intelligence in his eyes, and to sense the calm strength that radiated from his well-trained body. Then, in a moment that would be replayed in news stories, legal journals, and psychology textbooks for years to come, Emma raised her small right hand and pointed directly at Rex. Her finger, tiny and perfectly formed, extended toward the dog. With absolute certainty, the silence in the courtroom became so complete that the humming of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. Every person present, lawyers, court personnel, spectators, even the usually stoic bailiff, held their breath as they sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. Emma's lips parted, and from somewhere deep within her traumatized soul, her voice emerged. Clear, strong, and unmistakably real. Her words carried across the silent courtroom with the power of revelation. "Nice doggy helped me that scary night." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Sarah Chun burst into tears, her hands flying to cover her mouth in shock and joy. Judge Williamson dropped her case files, papers scattering across her bench as she leaned forward in disbelief. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, desperate to capture every word. Miguel Rodriguez went pale, his confident demeanor crumbling as his daughter's voice shattered his carefully constructed defense strategy. But Emma wasn't finished. Having broken through the barrier that had held her voice captive for 6 months, the words began flowing with the urgency of a dam bursting. "He was there when Daddy got really, really mad," she continued, her 3-year-old vocabulary struggling to convey experiences no child should ever have to describe. "The nice doggy stayed with me when Mommy was crying and had blood." Rex demonstrating the emotional intelligence that made him exceptional at his job remained perfectly still throughout Emma's revelation. His tail continued its gentle wagging, and his eyes never left the brave little girl who had found her voice in his presence. Officer Thompson felt tears welling in his own eyes as he understood the magnitude of what was happening. His partner, his loyal and skilled canine companion, had somehow unlocked the voice of a traumatized child, and in doing so, had possibly saved her from returning to an abusive situation. Judge Williamson finally found her own voice, though it trembled with emotion. "Bailiff, please ensure this testimony is being recorded. Court reporter, are you getting every word?" The court reporter nodded, her professional training taking over even as she wiped tears from her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. Every word." Emma looked around the courtroom, suddenly aware that all eyes were on her, but instead of retreating into silence, she took a step closer to Rex. "Can I pet the nice doggy who helped me?" she asked, her voice growing stronger with each word, The impossible had happened. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice, and with it, she had found her salvation. Judge Williamson's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her gavel, not to call for order, but to steady herself against the magnitude of what was unfolding in her courtroom. In 20 years of presiding over family court, she had witnessed countless dramatic moments, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of a previously mute child finding her voice in the presence of a police dog. The implications were staggering, and she knew that everything that happened in the next few minutes could determine not only Emma's future, but potentially influence family court proceedings across the nation. Dr. Martinez, Judge Williamson, called out, her voice carrying a note of urgency that hadn't been present during the morning's formal proceedings. "I need you in here immediately." Dr. Lisa Martinez had been in the hallway reviewing her notes for potential testimony when she heard the commotion from inside the courtroom. The child psychologist hurried through the heavy doors, her professional demeanor giving way to amazement as she took in the scene before her. Emma Rodriguez, the same little girl who had sat silently through months of therapy sessions, was standing confidently in the center of the courtroom, her attention focused entirely on the German Shepherd, who seemed to have become her unexpected lifeline to communication. "Your Honor," Dr. Martinez said, her voice filled with professional excitement, tempered by caution, "what I'm witnessing here is extraordinary. Emma's breakthrough appears to be triggered by a specific stimulus, the presence of this police dog. This suggests that her selective mutism may have been protecting memories associated with law enforcement response to her trauma." Officer Thompson, understanding the gravity of the situation, remained perfectly still while maintaining gentle control of Rex, the dog, with an intuition that seemed almost supernatural, continued his calm vigil beside Emma, his presence providing the security blanket that had been missing from every previous therapeutic intervention. Judge Williamson made a decision that would later be studied in law schools and psychology programs across the country. "I'm ordering an immediate in-camera interview with Emma, with Dr. Martinez present, and I want that dog to remain in the room. Bailiff, clear the courtroom except for essential personnel, the child's guardian ad litem, and her foster mother." As the courtroom emptied of spectators and non-essential personnel, Miguel Rodriguez's attorney raised a frantic objection. "Your Honor, my client has the right to be present during any testimony that might affect custody determination." "Mr. Webb," Judge Williamson replied with steel in her voice, "your client's presence might further traumatize this child and prevent us from learning the truth. He can observe from my chambers via closed-circuit monitor, but he will not be in this room while Emma is speaking." The atmosphere in the now quieter courtroom became intensely focused as Dr. Martinez knelt beside Emma, positioning herself at the child's eye level while maintaining the careful distance that trauma-informed therapy required. Rex remained the anchor point of Emma's attention, his steady breathing and calm presence, providing the psychological safety net that had been missing from every previous attempt to reach her. "Emma," Dr. Martinez said gently, her voice taking on the soothing tone she used with her most fragile patients, "can you tell us about the doggy who helped you before? The one you remember from that scary night?" Emma's response came with a clarity that stunned everyone present. "Bruno," she said, the name emerging from her memory with perfect precision. "His name was Bruno, and he was brown and black-like this nice doggy. He came with the lady police officer when Daddy made the loud breaking sounds." Court stenographer Margaret Riley's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every precious word while tears streamed down her face. In 30 years of court reporting, she had never been so emotionally invested in documenting testimony. Emma continued, her 3-year-old vocabulary struggling to convey experiences that would challenge an adult's ability to process. "Bruno came to my room when I was hiding under the bed. He put his nose right here." She pointed to the space under her chair. demonstrating how she had been concealed, and he made a soft sound like this. Emma attempted to imitate a dog's gentle whine, a sound heartbreaking in its innocence. Dr. Martinez recognized the significance of these details immediately. Emma, what else do you remember about Bruno in that night? He stayed with me when the ambulance people came for Mommy. She had red on her face and couldn't talk good. Bruno let me touch his fur, and it was soft and warm. He wasn't scared of Daddy's shouting like I was. The revelations continued to pour forth, each detail more significant than the last. Emma described how Bruno had remained calm during the chaos, providing a source of stability in a world that had suddenly become terrifying and unpredictable. She remembered the dog sitting beside her while police officers took photographs and collected evidence, his presence making the strange procedures less frightening. The lady police officer told Bruno to stay and watch Emma. She continued, her memory remarkably intact despite her young age and the traumatic circumstances. Bruno was my special guard dog. He kept the scary parts away. Judge Williamson immediately ordered her clerk to pull the police report from that February night, cross-referencing Emma's testimony with official records. Within minutes, the documentation confirmed Emma's account. Officer Janet Rodriguez and her canine partner Bruno had indeed been the first responders, and Bruno had been specifically assigned to remain with Emma while crime scene investigators processed the apartment. But Emma wasn't finished revealing the memories that Rex's presence had unlocked. Daddy got mad because Mommy said she was going to take me away. He threw the lamp at the wall, and it broke into a million pieces. Then he grabbed Mommy's arm and shook her really hard. Dr. Martinez gently guided Emma through the recollection, her professional training helping her extract crucial information while protecting the child from re-traumatization. What happened next, sweetheart? Mommy fell down and hit her head on the kitchen table. There was so much red, and she made sounds like she was hurt real bad. I was scared, so I hid under my bed with Mr. Hoppers. But then I heard sirens, and Bruno came to find me. The testimony was devastating in its simplicity and clarity. Emma's childlike language conveyed a pattern of escalating domestic violence. That had culminated in the assault that brought police to their apartment. More importantly, her memories provided crucial details about her father's behavior that hadn't been captured in the official reports. Details that could only have come from someone who had witnessed the entire incident from beginning to end. Rex remained Emma's constant anchor throughout the testimony, his steady presence allowing her to access memories that had been locked away behind walls of trauma for 6 months. The bond between them transcended species, creating a bridge between terror and truth that would change everything. With Emma's voice now flowing like a river after a dam breaks, the full horrifying scope of her home life began to emerge in devastating detail. Dr. Martinez, recognizing the unprecedented opportunity to gather crucial testimony, gently guided Emma through her memories, while Rex remained her steadfast emotional anchor. The German shepherd seemed to understand his vital role, never moving from his position, but offering occasional gentle tail wags that reassured Emma she was safe to continue speaking. Emma, Dr. Martinez said softly, can you tell us about other times when Daddy got angry? Were there other scary nights besides the one when Bruno came? Emma's response shattered any illusion that the February incident had been an isolated occurrence. Daddy got mad lots of times, she said matter-of-factly, her 3-year-old honesty cutting through the courtroom like a knife. When he drank the brown bottles, his voice got loud and mean. Mommy would tell me to go to my room and close the door, but I could still hear the breaking sounds and the crying. Judge Williamson felt her heart sink as she realized they were uncovering a pattern of systematic abuse that went far beyond a single incident documented in police reports. She glanced at the closed-circuit monitor, showing Miguel Rodriguez in her chambers, watching his confident demeanor crumble as his daughter's testimony demolished his carefully constructed redemption narrative. Emma continued, her memories flowing freely now that the psychological dam had burst. One time, Daddy threw Mommy's phone at the wall because she was talking to Grandma. He said bad words and made a big hole in the wall. Mommy had to put tape over it so the neighbors wouldn't see. She pointed to her own arm, indicating where she had witnessed injuries. Mommy had purple marks here, and she couldn't move her arm good for lots of days. The court reporter's fingers moved frantically across her stenotype machine, capturing every devastating detail while fighting back tears. Margaret Riley had documented thousands of hours of testimony in her career, but nothing had ever affected her as deeply as listening to this small child describe horrors no person should ever experience, let alone witness at such a young age. Dr. Martinez, drawing on decades of experience with traumatized children, recognized that Emma's trust in Rex was allowing her to access memories that might otherwise remain buried forever. "Sweetheart, did you ever try to help Mommy when Daddy got angry?" Emma's response revealed the heartbreaking helplessness of a toddler trapped in a violent household. "I tried to be really, really quiet so Daddy wouldn't get more mad. Sometimes I hid my cookies under the bed for when the nice police doggies came back, because Bruno was hungry, and I wanted to give him treats if he came to help us again." This revelation struck everyone in the room with its tragic innocence. Emma had been preparing for future police interventions, stockpiling treats for the canine officers she hoped would return to rescue her family. The image of a 3-year-old hiding cookies as an emergency plan was almost too heartbreaking to contemplate. Judge Williamson immediately ordered her bailiff to contact Detective Susan Walsh, who had handled the original domestic violence call. Within 20 minutes, Detective Walsh arrived at the courthouse, her face grim as she listened to Emma's testimony through the courtroom speakers. "Your Honor," Detective Walsh said as she entered the courtroom, "I need to share some additional context about the night we responded to the Rodriguez apartment. What Emma is describing aligns perfectly with evidence we collected, but couldn't fully explain at the time." The detective's testimony added professional credibility to Emma's childlike recollections. "When we arrived at the scene, we found evidence of multiple violent incidents, holes in walls that had been patched, furniture with damage that appeared to be weeks or months old, and neighbors reported they had heard domestic disputes on numerous occasions but had never called 911 before that night." Emma, emboldened by the validation of her memories, revealed even more disturbing details. "Daddy said if Mommy ever called the police again, he would hurt me too. He said the police were bad people who wanted to take me away forever. But Bruno wasn't bad. Bruno was nice and soft and made me feel safe." This revelation explained why Carmen Rodriguez had been reluctant to seek help despite the escalating violence. The threat against Emma had effectively silenced her, creating a trap that kept the family isolated and vulnerable. Officer Thompson, who had remained silent throughout Emma's testimony, finally spoke up. "Your Honor, what Emma is describing about Bruno's behavior is consistent with our K-9 trauma response training. Bruno was specifically trained to provide comfort to child witnesses and victims. If he remained with Emma during the investigation, it means he sensed she needed that support." Emma looked up at Officer Thompson with bright eyes. "Is Bruno okay? I wanted to see him again, but nobody knew where he went." "Bruno retired last year, sweetheart," Officer Thompson said gently. "He lives with his handler now and plays with other dogs all day. He's happy and safe." The revelation seemed to bring Emma great comfort, and she turned back to Rex with renewed affection. "This doggy is just like Bruno. He makes the scared feelings go away." Dr. Martinez seized this moment to ask a crucial question. "Emma, if you had to go back to live with Daddy, how would that make you feel?" Emma's response was immediate and unequivocal. Scared. Really, really scared. I don't want Mommy to get purple marks again. And I don't want to hide under my bed anymore. I like living with Miss Sarah because nobody yells and nothing gets broken. The courtroom fell silent as the full impact of Emma's testimony settled over everyone present. Miguel Rodriguez's attorney, watching from the chambers via monitor, had no defense against the clear, consistent, and heartbreaking testimony of his client's own daughter. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, who had struggled all morning to build a case based on medical reports and police documentation, now had the most powerful evidence possible, the clear, credible testimony of the child herself, unlocked by an unexpected, four-legged therapist who had appeared at exactly the right moment. Judge Williamson knew that Emma's words had fundamentally changed everything about this custody case, and that the truth, finally spoken aloud, would ensure that this brave little girl would never have to hide under her bed in fear again. By 3:47 p.m. that Tuesday afternoon, what had begun as a routine custody hearing in Phoenix had transformed into something extraordinary that would capture hearts around the globe. Maria Santos, a veteran court reporter for Phoenix 12 News, had been covering family court proceedings for 8 years, but she had never witnessed anything remotely comparable to Emma Rodriguez's breakthrough testimony. As she sat in the courthouse press room, frantically typing her initial report, Maria knew she was documenting a story that transcended typical legal proceedings. 3-year-old finds voice through police dog, reveals years of abuse in stunning courtroom testimony, Maria typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she struggled to capture the magnitude of what she had witnessed. Within an hour of posting her preliminary story online, the Phoenix 12 News website crashed from overwhelming traffic as readers shared the article across every social media platform imaginable. The story's viral spread began modestly local Phoenix residents sharing on neighborhood Facebook groups, expressing amazement at the courtroom drama unfolding in their city. But something about Emma's story possessed an almost magnetic quality that drew people in and compelled them to share it with others. Perhaps it was the innocent bravery of a 3-year-old finding her voice to speak truth to power. Or maybe it was the remarkable role played by Rex, the German shepherd who had unknowingly become a 4-legged therapist. By evening, major news networks were scrambling to cover the story. CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his primetime show with Emma's story, interviewing child psychology experts about the unprecedented nature of her breakthrough. What we're seeing here, explained Dr. Robert Chun, a leading expert in childhood trauma, challenges our understanding of how young children process and recover from severe psychological trauma. The role of the police dog as an emotional catalyst is remarkable and will likely influence therapeutic approaches for years to come. Fox News, MSNBC, and ABC News all featured segments about Emma's story, with legal experts debating the implications for family court proceedings nationwide. The hashtag #EMMSVoice began trending on Twitter, with thousands of users sharing their own stories of childhood trauma, domestic violence survival, and the healing power of animals. The Phoenix Police Department's headquarters was inundated with calls, emails, and packages addressed to Rest and Officer Thompson. Children from across the country sent drawings of police dogs, while dog lovers mailed treats, toys, and heartfelt letters praising Rex's inadvertent role in Emma's breakthrough. Police Chief Maria Rodriguez, no relation to Emma, held an impromptu press conference, struggling to maintain professional composure as she described the pride her department felt in their K-9 units. Rex is a 5-year veteran of our force, Chief Rodriguez explained to the gathered media, but what happened in that courtroom today goes beyond his training. Sometimes, the most profound healing happens in ways we never expect. She announced that the department would be establishing the Emma Rodriguez Fund dedicated to expanding canine therapy programs for child victims of domestic violence. The story resonated particularly strongly with domestic violence survivors and advocates. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reported a 300% increase in calls within 48 hours of Emma's story breaking, with callers specifically mentioning that Emma's courage had inspired them to seek help. Sarah Martinez, executive director of the Phoenix Women's Shelter, found herself fielding interview requests from around the world as reporters sought to understand the broader implications of Emma's testimony. What Emma did in that courtroom, Martinez explained to a reporter from the BBC, was demonstrate that children are far more aware of domestic violence than adults often realize. Her testimony reveals the sophisticated coping mechanisms that young children develop to survive in violent households. This story should serve as a wake-up call to anyone who thinks children don't understand what's happening around them. The international response was equally overwhelming. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in London tweeted their support for therapy animal programs, while police departments from Toronto to Tokyo shared Emma's story to highlight the diverse roles their K9 units play in community healing. Child advocacy organizations across Europe used Emma's breakthrough as evidence for the importance of trauma-informed legal proceedings. Rex himself became an unlikely celebrity. The German Shepherd's photograph appeared on magazine covers, and video footage of his calm presence during Emma's testimony was viewed millions of times across social media platforms. A children's book publisher in New York contacted Officer Thompson about creating a series featuring therapy dogs helping traumatized children, with all proceeds designated for victim assistance programs. The legal community responded with equal fascination and concern. Family court judges from across the United States contacted Judge Williamson, seeking guidance on how to implement trauma-informed practices in their own courtrooms. Harvard Law School announced plans for a symposium on the role of animal-assisted intervention in legal proceedings. With Emma's case serving as the primary focus, Dr. Lisa Martinez found herself at the center of a professional whirlwind as child psychologists worldwide reached out to understand the therapeutic implications of Emma's breakthrough. "We're seeing immediate changes in practice," she explained during a teleconference with colleagues from 12 countries. Therapy animal programs for traumatized children are receiving unprecedented funding and support. Emma's story has demonstrated the potential for unexpected healing modalities that we might never have considered otherwise. The story also sparked broader conversations about domestic violence prevention and the need for better support systems for children who witness family violence. Emma's innocent testimony about hiding cookies for future canine visits became a powerful symbol of how children adapt to traumatic circumstances, inspiring new research into the resilience mechanisms that young minds develop. Local businesses in Phoenix began displaying "We support Emma" signs in their windows, while the Arizona State Legislature announced plans for new funding to support trauma therapy programs for children. Emma's story had transcended its origins as a custody case and evolved into a movement for protecting vulnerable children and recognizing the healing power of the human-animal bond. As donations poured in from around the world designated for everything from K9 training programs to child therapy services to domestic violence shelters, it became clear that Emma's brave voice had not only saved her own future, but had inspired a global community to take action on behalf of children everywhere who needed someone to speak for them. 2 months and 3 days after Emma Rodriguez first found her voice in courtroom 3B, Judge Patricia Williamson sat in her chambers on a crisp December morning, reviewing the final documents that would forever change a little girl's life. The custody case that had begun as a legal puzzle with missing pieces had transformed into a landmark ruling that would influence family court proceedings for generations. Emma's courage in speaking her truth had not only saved her own future, but had sparked a revolution in how the legal system approaches childhood trauma. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity for Judge Williamson's final ruling. Media representatives from around the world occupied the back rows, while child advocacy organizations, domestic violence survivors, and legal professionals filled every available seat. Sarah Chun sat in the front row, holding Emma's hand, both of them dressed in their finest clothes for this momentous day. Emma, now speaking regularly, though still receiving weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez, had specifically requested that her special doggy friend Rex be present for the hearing. Officer Marcus Thompson and Rex occupied their usual spot near the back of the courtroom, but today they were there by special invitation rather than coincidence. Rex wore a ceremonial collar decorated with tiny American flags, a gift from children across the country who had sent thousands of letters praising his role in Emma's breakthrough. The German Shepherd seemed to understand the significance of the occasion, sitting with perfect posture while his intelligent amber eyes occasionally checked on Emma. Judge Williamson entered the courtroom with unusual solemnity, carrying not only the weight of Emma's future, but the knowledge that her decision would be scrutinized by legal experts worldwide. She had spent weeks consulting with colleagues, reviewing precedents, and considering the broader implications of a case that had evolved far beyond a simple custody dispute. After careful consideration of all testimony, evidence, and the best interests of the child, Judge Williamson began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. I hereby terminate the parental rights of Miguel Rodriguez and award full legal custody to Sarah Chun, with the understanding that formal adoption proceedings will commence immediately. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Judge Williamson wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am awarding supervised visitation rights to Carmen Rodriguez, contingent upon her continued participation in domestic violence recovery programs and the establishment of a safe, stable living environment independent of any relationship with the biological father. Emma's mother, who had been sitting quietly in the middle section of the courtroom, burst into tears of relief. Over the past 2 months, she had transformed her life with the same courage her daughter had shown in speaking the truth. Carmen had completed an intensive domestic violence recovery program, secured employment at a local childcare center, and moved into a small apartment across town. The supervised visitation arrangement would allow her to slowly rebuild her relationship with Emma while ensuring the child's safety remained paramount. Sarah Chun could barely contain her joy as she realized that the little girl she had grown to love as her own daughter would officially become part of her family forever. Emma, understanding that she would never have to leave Miss Sarah or worry about returning to her father's house, smiled brightly and waved at Rex, who responded with a gentle tail wag that seemed to convey his approval of the proceedings. But Judge Williamson had one more surprise in store. I would like to present a special recognition to Officer Marcus Thompson and his canine partner Rex for their inadvertent but crucial role in this case. Their presence enabled this child to find her voice and speak the truth that ultimately ensured her safety and well-being. Mayor Kate Gallego, who had been following Emma's story from the beginning, stepped forward to present Rex with a special medal, the Phoenix Hero Award, typically reserved for human first responders who demonstrate exceptional courage. As the medal was attached to Rex's collar, the courtroom rose in a standing ovation for the humble German Shepherd, who had unknowingly changed the course of legal history. Emma asked if she could approach Rex, and with Judge Williamson's permission, she walked confidently to where her canine hero sat waiting. Thank you for helping me find my words, she whispered, as she gently petted Rex's soft fur. You're the bravest, nicest doggy in the whole world. Rex leaned into her touch, his calm presence continuing to provide the emotional support that had first unlocked Emma's voice 2 months earlier. The adoption finalization ceremony took place 3 weeks later in a much smaller, more intimate setting. Judge Williamson conducted the proceedings in her private chambers, with only immediate family and close friends present. Emma, now 4 years old and thriving in her weekly therapy sessions, had specifically requested that Rex serve as the honorary ring bearer for the ceremony, carrying her new adoption certificate in a special velvet pouch attached to his collar. As Sarah signed the final documents making Emma officially her daughter, the little girl looked up at her new mother with bright, trusting eyes. "Does this mean I get to keep you forever and ever?" Emma asked, her voice clear and strong afar. Cry from the silent child who had first entered Sarah's home nearly a year earlier. "Forever and ever, sweetheart," Sarah replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You're my daughter now, and nothing will ever change that." Dr. Martinez, who had witnessed Emma's remarkable transformation from selective mutism to confident communication, documented the case as a breakthrough example of trauma recovery through unexpected therapeutic intervention. Her research paper on Emma's case would later be published in the Journal of Child Psychology and become required reading in graduate psychology programs worldwide. The monthly visits to the Phoenix Police Department Canine Training Facility became a cherished tradition for Emma and Sarah. Emma had appointed herself as the official gentleness instructor for new canine officers, showing them how to approach scared children with patience and kindness. Her natural ability to connect with both the dogs and their handlers had proven so valuable that the department created a formal volunteer program around her involvement. Officer Thompson often watched Emma work with new canine teams, marveling at how a child who had once been trapped in silence had become a teacher of communication and healing. Rex, and now retired from active duty, but still serving as an ambassador for the canine program, remained Emma's special friend and continued to provide comfort to other children who needed help finding their voices. On Emma's 5th birthday, celebrated in Sarah's backyard with friends from her new school and neighbors from their quiet cul-de-sac, she made a wish as she blew out the candles on her butterfly-themed cake. When Sarah asked what she had wished for, Emma smiled and pointed to Rex, who was sleeping peacefully under the shade of an oak tree. "I wish that every scared kid could have a nice doggy like Rex to help them be brave," Emma said. "Because sometimes all you need is someone who listens with their heart instead of just their ears." The story that had begun with silence in a Phoenix courtroom had evolved into a symphony of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Emma Rodriguez Chon had not only found her voice, she had used it to change the world.